This is Andy Collins with Tridea Partners. We're going to go ahead and get started. Looks like many of you have already, so we hope that you can see our screen okay. If not, please go ahead and send us a little question in the chat or the question area of the GoToWebinar panel. So thanks again for joining us. Today we're going to cover the new features of GP 2016. I'm going to start out with just a few PowerPoint slides to outline the GP roadmap, some of these features that we're going to be highlighting, but really 45 minutes of this demo is going to be our team here at Tridea walking through the capabilities and features in an actual demo of a live environment. So just to kind of go over the agenda for today, following that brief introduction here, we'll look at the GP roadmap, what Microsoft has added into the latest releases of GP, and what is in store for the future. We'll look at the demo of the key areas where they've made major changes, including the business intelligence area, financials, distribution, analytical accounting, project accounting, and just some general system changes. And then we'll end it with a Q&A session. We ask that you please ask the questions in the GoToWebinar panel. And you can enter the questions throughout the presentation. We'll cover them at the end. So when we talk about the new feature list that we'll demo today, under the business intelligence area, we're going to look at how you can now import and export Smartlist Designer reports. We'll look at how you can now export numbers to Excel in formatted formats. We're going to look at how you can create Smartlist from favorites using Smartlist Designer. And then under the financial area, we're going to look at how they now have included budget exception reports, some improvements under Analytical Accounting in terms of access settings, Payables Management using credit cards as a payment type now, auto deposit cash receipt batches, added attachments, now being able to select and send via email, some other general ledger enhancements. Then under the distribution area, there's a nice new view called All-in-One. And so that's under the sales, inventory, and purchasing area, where you can now see all related records under a given vendor, for instance. We'll dive into a couple minor changes in Analytical Accounting. They have now added the ability to flag a project at the time of requisition entry. So that was something that you had to go with a third-party product in the past. So they've enhanced that under the workflow area. And then we'll also look at some other workflow enhancements at the end. So real quickly on the roadmap, for those of you who attended our recent Dynamics customer event, so we looked at this. So really, going back to 2013, you'll see here the addition of the web client. They started building out the capability to host GP in Azure. Followed that up with building out a new workflow engine directly within GP versus relying on SharePoint. Then they got into some changes around the ability to integrate and modify GP. Then moving into now 2015, just last year, the last half of last year, they started building up some apps, and that all-in-one viewer was first introduced. Then in 2016, just the first half of this year, they've now included all browser support for the web client, added some more workflow enhancements, and then really the last half of this year now, it's about adding in Power BI and some other business intelligence capabilities, and then they'll continue to enhance based on customer feedback. So that's really kind of the roadmap that Microsoft has laid out for GP. Again, we're going to focus really on 2016 today and some of the major enhancements. These are other enhancements that we won't cover today, but following the webinar, if you do have any questions or you want a document that really outlines every single change in 2016, our team at Tridea, myself, Andy, and Victoria can certainly make sure you get your hands on this extensive document with all changes. So with that said, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Katie Baker and Shannon Hernandez, two of our application consultants here at Tridea Partners, who will demonstrate some of these new capabilities. Go ahead, Katie.
Hi, thanks everyone. So following the agenda that was in the meeting invite, we're going to start by looking at the Smartlist enhancements. So we'll go ahead and we'll open up our Smartlist. Smartlist Designer is new to, I believe, 2013 and on, but it provides the ability, instead of needing to have Smartlist Builder, you can click on the New button and create your own specific reports. So you can do it by choosing any of the tables within GP, any of the products within GP, and then you can link tables together. My favorite way of utilizing this tool is to create an easy SQL view and then link it. So I'm going to go ahead here and I'm going to execute my SQL view. So now it's created my view AR apply detail. I'm going to then come into my Smartlist Designer and I'm going to create AR apply detail Smartlist. I'm going to choose which folder to put it under. I'm going to put it just under my Microsoft Dynamics GP folder, and I'll stick it under my sales folder since it's a sales-related view. I'm going to come in down all the way to the bottom and expand my views and go into the company. So again, this feature was available in 2013 R2, but now there's the ability to export and import these. So if you have different environments, if you have different companies, you can do this you can easily export and import. So there's a lot of stuff in there, so it's just taking a little bit of time to pull up all the views. You can see, you can also choose from any of the views that already exist in Dynamics GP as well. We're going to find ours there at the bottom, View AR Apply Detail. You can set some predetermined filters if you want. You could remove some of the fields that are listed in the view. I'm going to leave it as it is, and I'm just going to go ahead and click OK. And now I see my AR Apply Detail, which is a hard list to sometimes get when you're just looking at the receivables side. This is going to let me know what documents have been applied to each other. And then if I want to export that Smartlist, I'll just come up here and go to Export. Click on the Export button. The available Smartlists that are listed here are ones created by Smartlist Designer, so I only see this one. I'll insert it, and then I'll save it to a file. And so again, so I could then save this file, send it to my peers. They could then import it if they have their own client install. So a nice, easy way to not have to recreate those lists, especially if you put more effort for creating it than I just did. So then another enhancement on the Smartlist side is creating a Smartlist Designer report from one of your favorites. So in the past, if we went into receivables transactions here and we had just our default Smartlist, if we click New, we're going to be creating a Smartlist from Smartlist Designer using the default Smartlist. And so this is the default set of fields. If we wanted to add any additional ones, we would have to add them. Now we have the ability to use one of our favorites. So let's look at past due customer transactions. I could then add columns, remove columns, change my, the data that I'm showing in this Smartlist, save it as a favorite, and when I create a new Smartlist Designer report, you can see that it's pulled in all of the columns that are in my favorite Smartlist. So before you could only do it, it only let you have that one option of doing the very default Smartlist, none of the actual Smartlist favorites. Now you can use the tool that you're used to, get it really close to how you need it, and then come into Smartlist Designer and maybe do the table joins or what other tasks you need to do to get that Smartlist exactly the way you need it. And then the last Smartlist enhancement, we can now, when we export to Excel, it actually formats our numbers as numbers. So before, it would format everything as general. We can see that it's formatted as general for all fields that are not numbers. So when we click on our number, it's now a number. Saves you a little bit of your Excel work so you can easily look and grab sums of information and whatnot because they're already formatted as numbers. Then moving on to the budget exception reports. For anyone that's used the budget tool in GP, it's really nice and easy. You can easily create new budgets and have it all done through Excel. So it's a really nice tool. The problem came into play when after you export the data, you manipulate your budget. Obviously, we're going to go through our template. We're going to make our updates to the amount, maybe, add in different accounts. So I created this budget just for a small range of accounts. And the issue before would happen if you had a duplicate account listed twice in your list. When you imported it through the budget tool, you didn't know why your budget dollars didn't match your spreadsheet. And it was because you either had an invalid account or a duplicate account. Now the system is going to give you an exception report so you know why your dollars aren't matching. So I did an Excel budget export. I based it off of a historical year. I increased it by a certain percentage. It gave me my export. I then specifically put an invalid account in here so that we could show you the exception report. So again, as you pass this through hands and people are adding and removing columns that apply to them, rows that apply to them, they might accidentally overwrite one of the account numbers or again have a duplicate. So I've made sure we have an invalid one in there. And when we go into our budget to import it from Excel, we're going to actually see that we've got some issues with it. So I'll choose my budget. I'm going to choose my file. I'm going to choose the tab on my worksheet. I'm going to click Finish. It's going to import that data with the new amount, and it's going to give me an exception report letting me know if it was successful or what errors might have occurred. I'll send this to the screen. And there we go. We can see that this account does not exist. So again, it saves you a lot of headaches in trying to determine why your Excel spreadsheet doesn't match. A lot of the times I tell clients after you imported it, go into your budget and go and export to Excel and look at your two spreadsheets because that's really what's in GP. So it's a real quick, easy way to see that everything uploaded correctly. Now you're going to have even more insight right away into what issues might be happening. So another feature that's been added is using credit cards as the payment for a check batch. So when we go to our Select Check window, we'll go ahead and we'll create a batch here, CC Payments. We go and look at how we set that batch up. We're going to see now that credit card is an option. It's let us choose our credit card, so our America charge is linked to our vendor. So in the case where you want to record detailed payables transactions that are paid by a credit card, this then transfers the liability to that vendor. So you're now going to see, instead of it under all of the individual vendors, all of this whole check batch will show up under your credit card vendor, allowing you to more easily reconcile your credit card statement and pay that credit card bill. Another nice feature that's been added has to do with our cash receipts and deposits. So we're going to go into our company setup window. We're going to go into the options button. And all the way at the bottom here, they've added automatically post cash receipt deposits. So what that means is, in the past, we would create a cash receipt batch. As usual, we would post that batch. We would then have to go into the financial module and do what's considered and called a bank deposit transaction. If you didn't do the bank deposit transaction, when you go to do your bank rec, you don't see any of your cash receipts. Now, you have the option, if you select that company checkbox to automatically post those deposits, anything that's done in a cash receipt batch is going to be automatically posted as a deposit transaction, so you can just skip that step. So if you continue to do a cash receipt transaction outside of a batch, it will still stop here. So it does only work for batch cash receipt transactions. And then it's important, to modify your training procedures so that the users understand that the cash receipts entered in a certain batch are going to actually be the deposit and will be that deposit transaction and how that will show up on your bank statement. Another option that we have is to have some of our attachment documentation flow through to transactions. So I think a lot of us are familiar with the fact that we can attach documents to our master records and to transactions. So if we go ahead and we look at our customer record here, we see that we've got an attachment here because it's indicated in yellow. I'm going to click on it. It says there's a document attached, and I can go ahead and see that we've got an invoice attached. We could have a contract attached, or many different types of documents that you might want to store alongside your customer transaction. With the new feature in VP, you have the option within this document attachment setup to allow a couple different things. First of all, to restrict documents from being deleted. So we know we've all had issues with the OLI attachments in the past where sometimes they go missing and then we try to hunt them down. Now we actually can prevent users from deleting them. And then we can also have the attachment flow from that master record into a transaction. And we have the option to say whether we want it to do that or not at the customer, item, vendor, and employee level. And then we also have the option to allow sending that attachment in an email. So we know that we can already email our invoices out, but if we wanted to, at the transaction level, email out the customer contract to them as well, or maybe some terms and conditions type paperwork or something like that, we have the ability to now send that along with the other documentation. So that's pretty huge. I know there's been a lot of requirements around, even on the purchase order side, having terms and conditions that take up a whole page, and you want that to be sent along with the purchase order, but it really essentially, you don't want it to be this huge long footer at the end of the PO. You want it to be a separate attachment. So now that gives you the ability to be able to do that. Another easy, kind of a no-brainer one in, I think, a lot of our minds that have been using GP for a long time, our summary and detail inquiry windows are now combined as for the open years and historical years. So you don't have to go into two spots to run an inquiry on the summary or detail of a GL account. It's all within the summary window or the detail window, and you can flip back and forth between historical years and open years. So again, pretty easy one. I think most of us would have expected it to already be like that a long time ago. So it's good that they got the message and started making our lives a little easier when we're doing our inquiries. So moving into the distribution side, these all-in-one views are really handy. A lot of the times we want to see, at a sales or purchasing level, what documents are related to each other. I can get this to fit here on my window a little better. So I mentioned that if there's the purchasing all-in-one view that was actually available in 2015 R2, and then they added sales and inventory for 2016. So if I choose my customer, it's going to load all the transactions related to this customer. I can drill in using the hyperlink to see more information about that particular transaction. The go-to is going to be very similar to your Smartlist go-to. If it's not posted, it's going to open up in the transaction entry window. If it's posted, it'll open in the inquiry window for you. You can click on the little caret to expand and see more information about that order without having to drill in. You can expand and collapse. By default, it shows you the most recent five transactions. So we can go to the next 5 or previous 5 by clicking on the links below. We can also add filters up at the top, so especially as we have very active customers with lots of transactions, we might want to utilize a filter to see the certain data. And then I think probably one of the best things that they did is if I check this box for this payment, it's going to show me the other transactions related to this payment. So it's showing me this invoice, so I already know without having to drill into the payment and drill into the apply button and see my invoice 222242. I can see it right here. And then I can also see that this order was what originated that invoice. And so again, pretty slick where we can see that whole picture without having to go into the other inquiry windows. So even right away here, I can see this was not paid. There are no cash receipts related to it. And again, I can then unclick it, and it will scan everything, and I can see all of the data. So pretty handy there. On the purchasing side, it's going to be very similar. These windows are all located under the inquiry section. Purchasing view, again, looks very, very similar with the same functionality. Being able to see if we've paid something, and then also being able to see the POs related to receipts is a huge one as well. We want to be able to see it in a better view. Before there was only the purchase order inquiry window, which was a little bit harder to follow, especially when we have situations where we have a lot of different receipts against POs. And then just to show all three of them, we're going to come into our inventory all in one view as well. Maybe that one wouldn't show anything. Usually our green phone has some data. Oh, I need to choose my site. Right? Yeah. You know. That's what we get with our demo system. Sometimes we don't know the most active items. But you get the idea. It's going to show us the quantity in, quantity moved, and quantity out. And we'll be able to restrict related documents on the inventory level as well. The other really, really nice feature, this came out in 2015 R2, but has been something that my clients have been requesting for a long time, a historical received not invoiced report. It's within SQL reporting services, however, so it is not within the out-of-the-box reports within GP, but again, it's within the out-of-the-box SQL reporting services reports that come with GP. Even just this view alone, all of these reports come with the standard package of GP, and now they've added this historical one. So you know, this report will work just like other reports. When we click on it, it's going to give us some headers, some filters that we have the option to use. We can then set that date. So it will run this report as an as-of date instead of just real time. So it used to be that if you forgot to run this at month end, too bad for you. And now it's different. Now we have the ability to do historical. We got a lot of data here in this company, so we'll continue moving on. I think that this makes sense to a lot of people. Again, it just used to be a real-time report, and now it functions more like your historical aging reports, your historical inventory trial balance. In my mind, it was really the main last historical report they really needed to add to the system to help us with our reconciliations of our GL accounts so that we can properly reconcile that accrued purchases account. So then for the analytical accounting users out there who have had to do a lot of work around setting up access for your users, there's now an option to not restrict the access. So in the past, when you would create a new transaction dimension code, you would come into your analytical accounting code, you would set up the new code, and after setting up the new code, you would then have to give access to it. I'm going to create a new code here. I'm going to click Save, and now I used to always have to come over to this window into my company setup for analytical accounting, user access. The other sad part, you can even add this to your quick links, so it made it very time-consuming for people. And now there's this option to choose if you want to restrict user access or not. Obviously, already, GP has a lot of security access anyway. And so if a user doesn't have access to a certain window or a certain GL account, they're not going to be able to access the AA code anyway. So it was a bit redundant, and I feel like a lot of people that used analytical accounting did not actually need to restrict it at this level. If I choose to restrict it, I can then distribute and adjust. This would allow for me to actually choose that code. This allows the user to adjust it after it's posted. And every time I created a new code, I had to go through this process, and this probably looks pretty familiar. I bet a lot of people wrote some macros to do this, but as you can see, depending on how many codes you have, it became a bear. In addition, you could do a SQL script to do this, but obviously, you know, our end users are not always, you know, we don't want them to have access to SQL reporting or SQL servers. So now, just by unchecking this box, I do not have to restrict the user access for these codes. And now, as I create them, they're available for users to use. They've also made some enhancements to the Analytical Accounting Smartlist. We all love Smartlist. With Smartlist Designer, that's opened up a lot of options for us because we can use some of the analytical accounting views that are published all over, you know, Google and whatnot. But now they've actually made it so that right out of the box, we've got some better ones. In our Analytical Open Transaction Smartlist, our dimensions used to be listed within a column. So you would have to search by that specific dimension to be able to see the balance, and now they've added them to columns, and so you can more easily do pivot tables once you export to Excel, etc. So they've done a lot of enhancements there on the Smart List so that you can utilize your your favorite tool in GP for analytical accounting. And then they've also added the project accounting options to our requisition entries. And so prior to this version, the purchase order entry, purchase order entry did allow you to add the project and cost category for a purchase, but the requisition did not. So if you wanted a requisition process, like Andy mentioned earlier, you would have to go through a third-party product. And now we are able to do the purchase requisition and have the user choose what project and cost category applies to that purchase, and it'll flow all the way through to the purchase order and then all the way into project accounting. So that's been another huge enhancement for us. So now we're going to talk about the workflow enhancements. So I'm going to hand it over to Shannon, and we're going to show a little bit of how this works amongst two users. So you'll see us kind of switch back and forth between a couple instances. We're logged into our demo company. One says myself, and then one says Shannon, so that we can show how this works with the approval process and the workflow processes.
All right. Hi, everyone. I was going to start with kind of the basic configuration so that we could all kind of get an idea of what we're kind of navigating through. So under Tools, Setup, Company, and Workflow. This is where the workflow is set up. So the ones we're going to look at today is for the batch, the payables batch approval, and then we'll also look at our vendor approval. So if I expand the batch approval, you'll see this green check box that kind of lets you know that that's the active approval process that's set up in workflow, and that's by checking this box here. So this one I just set up pretty basic, straightforward. It indicates here the name of the workflow and then any steps that are associated with that particular workflow. There are some options to send some email notifications for completed actions, the different steps throughout the workflow process. And then you can determine whether or not you want to allow for certain tasks to be delegated, approved by the originator, require that at least one approver, give multiple approvers, actually does the approval process here, or if you want to identify a final approver, you can identify that person here. There's also some actions that you can take for anything that's overdue. Do you want to escalate it to somebody else, or do you want to automatically reject it or no action taken? So in this one, I just, again, kept it pretty basic. I have one step that's an approval step. There's also the option to do a task step, if it's just something where you want someone to fill out some information or kind of look over something maybe doesn't require an approval process, but it's just a task that you want to go through, then you can identify them separately there. This next box is the conditions I'm asking that it always require this approval step. You can say that you want it to require it only if it meets certain conditions like an amount or the batch name is something in particular. Then you can identify those here and it'll move through that workflow accordingly. I've assigned this to myself. So again, I'm logged in as Katie right now, but I've assigned the approval to myself. I have an 8-hour time limit. This is set up through the workflow calendar, so you identify your working hours. So if you're Monday through Friday, 9 to 5, you would put that into your workflow calendar, which is another setup window, and then it would pick that 8-hour time frame based off of those work hours that you've identified here. You can also enable email messaging. So when this is sent to the approver or approvers, it's referenced here, then it'll send this template that we can modify or design however you need. I kept it in its basic form, and it'll just let them know that they have an approval that's waiting on them, and for them to go into either GP, or if they're not someone that uses GP, that they can approve through email. So these two features, this one was in the include document attachments was in the 2015 version. So this is where you could say scan an invoice or any other documentation that you wanted on an AP transaction, and it would actually attach any of those attachments in that batch to the approver so they could actually see the documentation. Here, right below it, it says include Word templates. So a really awesome new feature, and actually one that's come up a few times in the different workflow demos that we've done, is you can actually now attach the edit list that's associated with the batch so that the approver can actually see what was entered in GP. So you can now have both the actual document that the vendor has sent you, and then you can also verify that it was entered into GP correctly. So that's a really huge change, and I think a really good enhancement for this. You also have this completion process. I'm only requiring that one person approve it. If you had multiple people here, then you could require that a majority or all complete the process here. Similar thing with the vendor. We won't walk through that one as much. It's just I set it up in a very basic way too. Any approver or any vendor that gets set up needs to go through an approval process. I am also the approver on that one as well. So we'll go ahead and take a look at both of those now. So I'm just going to come in here. I'm just going to create a basic invoice. And let me create a batch. And you'll see here that in my batch window, I have this gray toolbar that's now identifying which workflow is set up. Right now, this is the status of that workflow. And then you'll see that there's now these icons for workflow, so you know the workflow is turned on. So in this case, this is normal batch setup. I'm just going to go ahead and double check it and then click Save, and then continue on with entering my transaction. So I'll select a vendor, navigate through that, create a document number, enter the invoice, double check my distributions are there, and maybe there's an attachment I want to attach. Katie walked through that earlier, where you can actually scan or attach a document. So let's say I'm going to go ahead and scan the sample invoice. I'm going to click OK, and then I'm going to click Save here. So now if I go into my batch, let's say I'm ready to submit it for approval. I come in here, I'll click Submit. I'm going to skip the AA edit list on this one. It gives me this little action box where I can add additional notes. So if there's anything I want to tell the approver, then I can add that here. So I'm just going to keep it basic. Please review and approve. And then I'll just, well, I'm Katie, so we'll just initial it. I'll click Submit. And then now if I pull up that same batch, you'll see that now it's updated. It's now on this step of the approval process. It's pending the approval by this user, and then here's the date and time that it was sent for that next step. If I want to recall the workflow, I can do that here, and then I can also click on this view history to see what steps it's taken and who's been assigned to and what actions it did, and then time and date stamp as well. So that kind of gives you some insight into where it's been and where it's going. All right. So then now I'm going to flip over into the other one. So here I am logged in as me. So let me just pull up my email.
This is dangerous, Shannon. We're going to alter your emails.
Nothing too exciting in there. Outlook is taking up forever.
You want to explain too, but it's not only for purchasing, but of course sales,
You can do it on sales,
requisitions as we talked about,
financial,
item approvals.
inventory. So yeah, there's a bunch of different workflows that you can set up now in this new version. 2016 came out with a lot, and now I think they're just trying to enhance the workflow processes. You know, as people are starting to use it and different things are coming up, I think that functionality they're trying to build out so that it's a little bit easier for the user. You know, one thing that some people don't understand is that workflow actually doesn't require, other than the requisition level, doesn't require that the approvers be licensed with GP. So as long as they have access to the environment and they're listed on the Active Directory, then they can actually approve the workflow through their email, which is what we're trying to pull up right now. But let me just close out and try to go back in. So that saves in a lot of costs related to the workflow process, and then obviously everyone, if you already have GP, then it saves. Okay.
So here you're trying to open up Office 365 in your specific email.
Yeah.
Just showing an example of what that email would look like when it comes through for approval.
Yeah. So well, basically what it would do is it would give you this email that has two links on it. It has an approve link and it has a reject link where you can move the action through the workflow. But then it also is going to send the attachment of the actual invoice document that I attached. And then it's also going to send you a Word version of the edit list. So the nice thing about that, too, is that, you know, sometimes the edit list can be a little funky, maybe a little harder to read. Enabling it in the Word template allows you to kind of manipulate that a little bit easier. A lot of us are more familiar with Word than we are with Report Writer. And so it kind of gives us that flexibility to be able to, you know, format that so that we can read it a little bit easier, review it a little bit easier, that sort of thing. Do you want to maybe make it your, are you, yeah, make yourself presenter on your computer, so Outlook? Does it reference me on here?
And maybe we can cover, there's a couple of questions that maybe we can cover now while we're just pulling up that email.
Yeah.
I'm trying to log in on Katie's computer for the Office 365 account, so who knows what that could be related to. But the first question that somebody had here was related to going back to the Smartlist builder. So it says, I saw the ability to create SQL views as backbone behind the Smartlist. Is there a published map of the database definition to assist in creating views that pull back meaningful data? So Katie, I don't know if you want to, Katie or Dean, Dean Anderson, one of our
Yeah, well actually, and I kind of even want to show something for that one. So give me 1 second here. Do you want?
So there's a tool within GP that allows you to go ahead and look at the data schemas. I think that's what Katie wanted to pull up to give you an example of what you're able to see, because sometimes these table names can be a little more cryptic. And so what Microsoft has done is try to provide some various views that allow you to kind of see how the data was organized. And so I think the goal there was to kind of show.
Okay, so Shannon's going to just show it actually on her computer. Sorry. So she's going to show us from her own Outlook instead of logging into Outlook on the server.
So maybe we can address the other one here too, Katie. Katie, you said the view.
All in one view. Oh, sorry.
The question was, Katie, you said the view all was in order by newest transactions. Can you adjust that view?
So in that view, there were little filters up at the top. You can adjust what you see you using those little filter buttons. However, it's not by default. So the default will show you the most recent transactions. But when you're in the window, you can filter, you can move on to other transactions, and you can filter by date if you wanted to. But by default, it's always just going to show you the first 5 when you first launch the window.
So now we're looking at Shannon's email and that workflow that generated generate the email with the attachments for either approval or rejection.
Yep. So like we kind of talked about earlier, I have the sample invoice that I had attached into the actual document itself, so I can look at the invoice that I got from the vendor, and then I can also now see the edit list for my particular batch. So again, this is the Word version, so we can manipulate this as needed. It's taking the original form of what you're used to seeing. The report writer version is just putting it into a Word template. So then the person can actually see what was entered in GP, confirm that everything looks correct before they approve. And so that's a really nice enhancement because I know a lot of people wanted to be able to have that visibility. And really the only way we could do it prior was if we did it by per transaction rather than on a batch level. And then we'd have to really build out this portion, this email, to have all those points that we just saw in the edit list. So this helps save a lot of time and it makes it a lot clearer and easier for people to see. And then it allows you to use the batch functionality. So this is something that they rolled out for both for payables, financial, sales, any batch level approvals that are activated in workflow now allow you to attach the edit list to those workflows. So that really helps with the batch. Because I'm outside of the server and I have to access this through my email outside of the Azure environment that we're demoing, if I click on this link, it won't let me approve because I'm not in the environment. But what I would do is I would just approve or reject. A similar dialog box that we saw earlier when I submitted the workflow would come into play, and you would just type in your notes, if anything, or just type in approved. It would then navigate it back to the workflow to show that it's completed. So if we go back into, let's make you presenter again. Yeah, and then just make yourself presenter again. So then once I would approve it, it would update that status bar to show completed, when I completed it, and then it would actually open up that posting ability that you see on the top that's currently grayed out, and would allow the individual to post the transaction.
Great, thanks Shannon. So was there anything else on the workflow side, or did you want to show the table?
Yeah, we're actually going to walk through the vendor approval as well, just so you guys can see that. So then that would be here under cards. And this one's pretty straightforward. Again, anytime workflow is activated, you'll see this gray bar here, and then you'll notice there's additional icons. So if I just come in here and create a test user, let's say that's all I'm going to submit at this point. Maybe it's something where you have tasks where other people fill out the other information, that sort of thing. You can create that through workflow. If there's an attachment that you have, maybe a contract or something with the vendor, then you can attach that here so that it lives on the actual vendor card. Again, clicking submit, it'll take me to that action dialog box. Please approve, and then I can click submit. So then when I look up test 2, again, it updates it. It says what step it's in, who needs to approve, and then the date and time stamp.
And you'll also notice it's on hold. So it's created in the system, but it's automatically on hold, and then the approval of the workflow will release that hold automatically.
And just to double check, this will work now. Oh, maybe.
Yeah.
All right. So here I am with, this is now for the vendor approval. So I'll click on the approve button. Again, that's a similar dialog box that references what it's for. So when we did the payables batch, it would actually say the Shannon batch here. So I could come in here and say approve, click on the approve button. It'll tell me that it was submitted and it moved on to the next step. So now when I come in back into Katie's, again, she can receive notifications letting her know that as well. But if I come back in here and I look at test 2, I now see that the vendor was approved and it was completed, and now it's no longer on hold. So I can utilize this vendor going forward. Same thing again with the payables batch.
All right, great.
Thanks, Shannon. So let's go ahead and address that.
Yeah, so there's a few different ways to kind of understand the table structure within GP. One of the things I use a lot is tools, resource descriptions, and then I go into tables. If I click on this ellipsis, I'll be able to see the products that are installed. So again, you know, project accounting, manufacturing, fixed assets, those are technically different products. And then within each product, I can see the different modules and the different breakdowns. I can then sort the tables by their physical name or display name, etc. I like to just do it by the physical name. There is some logic to how that's or how they're set up. Even if we look at the GL tables, we see we've got our master records in the 100 tables. We come down and we start getting into our 10,000 and 20,000 tables. Those all have to do with the transactions. As we move to the higher numbers, we're moving from a work, which would be an unposted status, to an open status, to a historical status. Depending on the module, those have a few different meanings. So that's kind of another part of that learning curve, is understanding how the data flows through the table. But this is a good way to at least get you to kind of the way that they've organized the tables and how it is broken out into the tables. And then if I double click on a table that I want to see, I can see the keys, the primary keys. I can see all of the fields that are in that table and what type of field they are, what position they are in, and what the physical name of the table, what the table shows it as. So here's the field name that makes sense to us. Here's the name of the table, or sorry, of the field within the database. So that's one way that I get around the system and find my tables and understand how to link them, because it really does give you a lot of that data. Even within a specific field, I can double click on it as well and see more information about that type of data field. Another thing that you can do, honestly, there's a lot of things published on the internet for GP because it's been around for a long time. I know that we have an Excel version of these tables as well, so that you can do more of a Control F and find your way through those tables. So we can, if you guys want to, whoever might be interested in that, just go ahead and shoot us a message. We are, for those of you who don't know already, our support at Tridea Partners email address is something that you guys can contact us at the end, and we can send you over that Excel version. I don't happen to have it on my computer right now, but I know it exists, and I can send that over. So there are, you know, again, if you do some research or you log into your customer source account, which is your Microsoft account, because for existing customers, you have access to a customer source website, which is Microsoft's website, and there's a lot of material on there as well.
I was going to add, yeah, in addition to support at TrideaPartners.com, if it's more specific to just new, new functions or features within 2016, go ahead and use the sales at TrideaPartners.com, and we'll make sure that we answer any questions you have. But either one will work. Either one will get to the right team, and we can address the questions. Well, great. Well, we're at the conclusion of our webinar here. We thank everybody for taking the time to join us today. Once again, if there are any questions, probably sales or support at TrideaPartners.com is a great way to get a hold of us. And then if you also want a more complete list of all the new features in 2016, that sales is probably the best email, and we'll make sure you get a copy of a document that outlines it in more detail. So enjoy your day. Thanks again. We'll all talk soon. Bye-bye.